Namaste, hello, and welcome to Global Week 2020, Be the Revival, India and a Better New World. I'm your host, Priyanka Deo, reporting live from New Delhi, and I am super stoked. This just in, we have over 10,000 registered attendees from 69 countries, making it a truly global collaboration and conference. As Manoj said, what a great platform to share ideas and innovate. With that being said, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi said in his inaugural address here at India Global Week, he spoke yesterday, I quote, "The story of global revival will have India playing a lead role." The numbers here at India Global Week show, as I said, over 10,000 registered attendees from 69 countries. With that being said, we'd love for you to engage with us as well. Please join us, share your thoughts, share your questions, share anything that you want, post up pictures. I want to see those pictures because I'm tracking it here. Use hashtag #BeTheRevival and follow India Inc. At India Inc. Corp. That's India, INCORP. Let's start with our next session. India and Australia already synergize, and now there are new and innovative synergies need to be both identified and implemented between both nations to change global realities. Now, this following discussion will focus on identifying these synergies with reference to the India Economic Strategy 2035, as well as the Australia Economic Strategy as well. I want to definitely learn more about this. That being said, and without wasting any more time, let's dive right into our realizing the potential India and Australia economic strategies. The session's in-country partner is Newland Global Group, and the session is presented by Trade and Investment Queensland, Asia Society Australia, Australia India Business Council, Asia Link Business, Global Victoria, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry Western Australia, Australia India Institute Delhi, and Indian Link. I now give it to our moderator for this session, Mr. Dipen Rughani, CEO, Newland Global Group, to begin this session. Dipen, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Australia, and good morning, India. Welcome to the Australia stream of India Global Week 2020, a unique initiative where India meets the world and the world meets India. In this session, titled Realizing the Potential, India and Australia Economic Strategies. In 2018, the Australian government released a report on its economic strategy for India, titled India Economic Strategy 2035, recommending to be put in its top 3 export markets, and India be made the 3rd largest destination in Asia for Australia's outbound investment to the tune of $100 billion by 2035. The report focused on building a transformational expansion of Australia-India bilateral ties with over 90 recommendations. The report identified 10 sectors and 10 states in an evolving Indian market, where Australia has competitive advantages and strengths, and where it should focus its efforts. However, it also categorically stated that opportunities would not come easy. The government would require a sharper national focus, patience, perception, and preparation is needed to engage with India. The report is the most detailed analysis ever undertaken of the complementarities of the 2 economies. The government of India commissioned a reciprocal report to the India Economic Strategy 2035, named Australia Economic Strategy, a blueprint to enhance trade opportunities between India and another country, which has never been attempted before. The first of its kind report by the Indian government, which reflects on the new emerging areas of cooperation, which can be explored between India and Australia. The release of the India Economic Strategy in 2018 and the imminent release of the Australia Economic Strategy is a way forward towards building a strong knowledge source. that could enhance our understanding of each other across different sectors, help businesses strategize, explore, and expand in the Indian or Australian market with ease. Hence, it is our absolute privilege. We are joined today by the authors of these reports and senior diplomats, Peter Varghese and Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, along with renowned thought leader on India's market strategy and understanding the logic of consumer India, Rama Bijapurkar. Let me introduce our esteemed panelists. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa was a member of the Indian Foreign Services from 1979 to 2017 and has served as India's ambassador to Italy, Thailand, Oman, Poland, San Marino, and Lithuania. As Secretary East in the Ministry of External Affairs of India, of the Government of India, he oversaw relations with Southeast Asia, Gulf, West Asia, Pacific, and Australasia. He also served as Indian ambassador and permanent representatives to FAO, IFAD, WFP, UNESCAP, and worked with the Organizations for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague, heading the government relations and media and public affairs branches. Ambassador Wadhwa has been India's chief delegate to the East Asia Summit, ASEAN India, ASEM, ACD, and the Arab League. He has been leading the CII task force writing the Australia Economic Strategy Report for the Government of India. Ambassador Wadhwa is currently a distinguished fellow with the Vivekanand International Foundation in New Delhi and an independent director on the boards of some corporate firms. Peter Varghese began as a Chancellor of the University of Queensland in July 2016. Prior to this appointment, Mr. Varghese's extensive career in public services and diplomacy spanned 38 years, included senior positions in foreign affairs, trade policy, and intelligence. Most recently, he served as the Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Previous senior appointments include High Commissioner of Australia to India, High Commissioner of Australia to Malaysia, Director General of the Office of National Assessment, Senior Advisor International to the Prime Minister of Australia. Mr. Varghese was the author of the comprehensive economic strategy, India Economic Strategy to 2035, commissioned by the Australian Prime Minister and submitted in July 2018. Rama Bijapurkar is India's most respected thought leader on market strategy and India's consumer economy. She has an independent consulting practice that works across sectors and organization types, subscribing her mission as bringing market and customer focus to business strategy. In addition to a consulting practice, Rama has served as an independent director on the boards of several of India's blue chip companies, including Axis Bank, Bharat Petroleum, CRISIL, Chrysalis, Godrej Consumer Products, Infosys, ICICI Prudential Life Insurance, Mahindra and Mahindra Financial Services, Reddington Gulf FZE. She also serves on the Governing Council of the Banking Code and Standard Boards of India, the Insurance Information Board, and is a member of the Eminent Persons Advisory Group of the Competition Commission of India. She has been a regular visiting faculty at the Indian Institute of Management, IIM, Ahmedabad, her alma mater, and is a member of its board of governors. Rama is a dominant voice in the media on business and policy issues in her areas of interest and work. She is the author of the internationally acclaimed best-selling books, We Are Like That Only, Understanding the Logic of Consumer India, Winning in the Indian Market, and she recently published a sequel to this titled A Never Before World, Tracking the Evolution of Consumer India. Welcome, Peter. Welcome, Anil, and welcome, Rama. May I ask you to make your opening remarks? Maybe I'll start with Peter.
Well, thank you very much, Dipen, for the invitation to participate today, and I'm delighted to join Rama and Anil on this panel. I thought I'd just focus on a few of the key takeaways from the India Economic Strategy paper that I was closely involved in, because I think it frames some of the discussion about the bilateral economic relationship. The first point I'd want to make is that it is always important to think long-term, but it is especially important to think long-term when it comes to India, because India is far too complicated a polity, an economy, a country, and a society for it to have a linear story. And if we are to engage with India, we need to be able to do so over a long-term time perspective. Secondly, I think the three big drivers of our prospective economic relationship are going to be scale, complementarity, and spreading risk. So scale is pretty obvious when it comes to India, and it's not just a question of population, it's also the fact that India now is the third largest economy if you measure it by PPP, a bit further down if you measure it by market exchange rates. Complementarity is really a judgment that what the Indian economy is going to need and what the Australian economy can provide are going to be in harmony or in sync, and that will create an important set of opportunities for our two countries. And the third factor, which in 2018 I wrote about, was diversifying markets and spreading our risk. And I think COVID has probably given that a particular fillip. Australia, like other countries, can't afford to have too many eggs in too few baskets, and India is potentially a very important additional big market. Two other things I'll mention very briefly. One is India is far too big a canvas to absorb in one bite. And so for Australian business looking to deal with India, they need a place to start, which is why I broke my report down into sectors and states with a neat symmetry of 10 in each. So I've identified 10 sectors where I think Australia has a measure of comparative advantage, and I also identified 10 states that would be good starting points for an Australian strategy. And the last point I'd make is that when we think about the economic relationship, we should be thinking about the bigger bilateral relationship, because all of these things link together in quite a complex ecosystem. So I was delighted that one of the outcomes of the virtual summit between our two prime ministers was to characterize the relationship as a comprehensive strategic partnership, because from my perspective anyway, there are three supporting pillars to our future. One is economic, which is obviously what my report is focused on, but the second is strategic. We are seeing now a growing strategic convergence. I think what's happening in our broader region, some of it China related, but not all of it, is going to bring Australia closer together strategically. And the third pillar, which is a very important pillar, is the people-to-people relationship, driven in large measure by the Indian diaspora in Australia, which is now well over 700,000 people. So taken together, I think that creates a very solid foundation for an economic, a strategic, and a people-to-people relationship.
Thank you, Peter. May I ask Ambassador Wadhwa to make his opening comments, please?
Thank you, Dipen. And let me just pick up from where Peter has left off by saying that, categorically that Australia-India relationship today is indeed in a very sweet spot. In fact, the virtual summit between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Morrison on the 4th of June confirmed this all-round improvement in the bilateral relationship. So essentially, it is geopolitics which is supplemented by economics that has galvanized this relationship. The Indian diaspora now is close to 700,000, and the Indian student community in Australia has crossed the 100,000 figure. So this has ensured that India figures regularly in the political discourse in Australia. Also, we've seen ties which have been elevated to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And so a relative lack of awareness so far about business opportunities on both sides has created a large untapped potential in several key areas across the board in the two countries, in trade as well as in investments. So the Australia Economic Strategy report, which you referred to, and has now been revised in large parts because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I have been working on with CI and KPMG teams, now awaits formal government approvals in India. And it identifies a number of key opportunity areas between Australia and India, at least in 20 different sectors. The report is also futuristic because it highlights opportunities in emerging areas which we do not actually lay emphasis on so much right now, but all of which are expected to gain relevance in the future. Most of the MOUs that were signed during the Modi-Morrison Virtual Summit on the 4th of June are in line with these recommendations. And I'd like to, basically mention just a few examples. So first, the implementing arrangement concerning cooperation in defense science and technology, and this is a supplement to the MOU on defense cooperation. The areas identified in the draft report for such collaboration that include sensors, underwater technologies, laser and hypersonic technologies, and also cooperation in shipbuilding between Indian shipyards and Australian shipbuilding industries. Second is the collaboration in space. So space situational activities, calibration and validation of satellite data, sharing of data and establishment of ground stations in Australia. I already identified areas of collaboration. Third is the MOU on cooperation in the field of mining and processing of critical strategic minerals. And this draft report identifies reserves of 21 out of the 49 minerals in Australia for India's critical mineral strategy, as well as for India's e-mobility program. Fourth is the MOU on vocational education and training. And here, India's large young population and the target of training 400 million people by 2022 has actually thrown open a lot of opportunities for Australian vocational education, areas such as enhancement of training curriculum, aligning Indian accreditation and assessment to global standards, and improving trainer quality. Fifth is the new collaborative arrangement which has been entered into on water resources management, training and education, and for developing sustainable solutions for water and economic development and water recycling. That is also in line with the recommendations in the draft report. Sixth area I'd like to mention is the Australia-India Scientific Reserve Fund. That's an example of a successful research fund set up between the two countries, which has seen joint funding for a number of successful projects in the areas of life sciences and biotechnology, genetics, etc. So here, the two sides have agreed to have a one-off special COVID-19 collaboration round. It's on the Scientific Reserve Fund in 2020. And the draft report again recommends enhancement of the fund. It also proposes setting up of similar funds in the field of humanities as well as startups. Seventh is the flagging of the need to strengthen India-Australia partnership in greens management and logistics to reduce post-harvest losses and to rationalize costs and supply chain logistics, and setting up education campuses in each of those countries during the summit. These are again proposals in the draft report. Finally, I'd like to mention that regardless of India's stand on the RCEP, and the report also recommends, and then again the summit has endorsed this, that India and Australia should now restart the free trade agreement negotiations, which were stalled due to the RCEP negotiations. So there's a lot to gain if this comes about quickly for both countries. So all in all, and I'd like to say the time has come for a very strong, reliable, and a multifaceted economic relationship between India and Australia. I'll end there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. And Rama, it's really interesting, that we have the eminent authors of the two economic strategies, but these strategies, are good at a certain level, but how are they going to get executed? What are the Indian consumers, thoughts and feelings, and how do they behave? And it's so nice to have you here. I'll hand over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Dipen, for having me here, and it's a privilege to share the screen, though not the stage, with Peter and Anil. I think India is the land of opportunity. All the opportunities that have been talked about are really wide open. Let me, in the opening remarks, just talk about the opportunity at a high level, the gain and pain of it around markets and people. So India's consumer market is of a mind-boggling scale. India's household expenditure, or private final consumption expenditure, as we call it, is the size of Australia's GDP. And we've also seen the power of compounding when you grow slow and steadily. So if we do go back to the 7% rate of growth we've talked about, we will add another India to India in a decade, and that's a lot. I think we also have a profusion of talent that is that values learning a great deal. It's street smart talent, it's formally well-educated world-class talent, and it is not very learned but highly learnable talent. And thirdly, I think the story of India can't be complete if you don't look at the DNA of innovation, which is to get more with less. It's a DNA that other global companies have carried back with them to their home markets as well. On the supply side, the domestic market is still wide open. It is underserved and underexploited, so there really is room. The consumer is ready, and the scope for supply is really quite manifold. And there is pain. I think the speakers before me have also talked a little bit about the pain of the market. One of the biggest pains is that while it is a large economy, the average Indian earns per capita GDP of a little over $2,000 while the average Australian is many, many times that at 55,000. It is a regulated economy. There is regulation. I think the speakers have talked about it as well. But it is regulation that has a logic to it, and we're seeing it get more transparent over time. So I will just end by saying that 20 to 30 years ago, when we talked about India, we talked about the potential and scope of what can be given its demography. But I think today we talk about the demonstrated potential of what the size and the value of the market is, and how open it is to receive whatever value to consumers.
Thank you, Rama. I might just start off now with some questions, and I'll direct my first question to Peter. Peter, what were your first thoughts when you were asked to write the India economic strategy? Did it enthuse you or overwhelm you? Did any aspect of the report come as a revelation, or did it surprise you?
Well, Dipen, when I was first asked to do this, I actually politely declined, largely because I knew this was going to be a huge task and I already had a lot on my plate. But I was persuaded otherwise, and because I was given a very, very good professional team in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to work with me, and the government commissioned some very deep dive research from McKinsey, it meant that what might have been a very impossible task turned out to be much more doable. In terms of surprises, look, India is always full of surprises. So at every corner, I think there was probably a surprise lurking. But, you know, in trying to present the narrative of India to an Australian audience, it's surprisingly difficult to define what an Indian economic model actually is. So notwithstanding decades of state planning, India has a very different trajectory to, say, East Asia, which Australia is much more familiar with in terms of trade and markets. This is not an export-led economic model. It is very much a consumption model with an SME sector which is both hugely important but largely informal. And then there's this peculiar mixture in India where entrepreneurialism and entrepreneurial skills sit side by side with a political culture which tends to favor state intervention over market solutions. Now, like everything in India, all of that is changing, the mix is changing, but it's not an easy story to capture in a coherent narrative. I think the other thing for an Australian audience would be a recognition that over time, the magnitude of the opening up of the Indian economy is very poorly understood in a country like Australia, because I think Australians still tend to think of the Indian economy as a closed economy, a highly protected economy. And when you look at the figures, the proportion of trade to GDP in India is almost to the decimal point identical to that of Australia. And our self-image in Australia is a very open economy, very engaged with the global economy. So I think the surprises, to the extent that they were more in how you capture a complicated narrative and how you deal with the sort of inherent contradictions that both in Australia and India our systems will always have.
Great answer. Thank you, Peter. Anil, you've written the reciprocal report, the AES. After having read the IES 2035, and you know, the IES identifies 10 industry sectors. Report that Indian businesses are interested in regards to, you know, connectivity with Australia that are different to the IS.
Right. So, Dipen, as I mentioned earlier, this report has been prepared with CIA and PMG teams. You know, there are, of course, a number of areas which are overlapping in the two reports, which is bound to happen because there is convergence there. But you know, broadly speaking, I think I would say that there are opportunities for Indian businesses across the broad sectors of investments in mining and resources, in agribusiness, in utilizing best practices of Australian healthcare, in cancer research and trials, and also collaborating in India-specific solutions to education and skills development. Then again, offering Indian products in new areas of information technology and in opportunities in other sectors like renewable energy, in tourism, in financial services, again in creative fields like digital technologies, animation and gaming, and then looking for collaboration in infrastructure, in joint manufacturing, in space and defense in particular, which have emerged as new areas. Then, as you mentioned earlier, there are opportunities for Indian businesses across the emerging areas like lithium-ion battery technology, medical and water technologies, data analytics and food computing, and also education and medical technologies, which have relevance in the future aspiration plans in both countries. So specifically, I think Indian businesses will look to offtake, look to offtake agreements actually with Australian resource companies, and that includes acquiring of mining technologies, which will help in the maximization of produce, sourcing of mining equipment and technologies, again providing high-quality product-based IT offerings to Australia, and also enhancing startup collaboration. That's a new emerging area of collaboration between the two countries. Also, in the retail side, the Indian businesses will be looking to sell more pharmaceuticals and biosimilars and in traditional medicine in the Australian market. They would like to have Australian medical technologies in India. Also have some collaborations in medical data coding, analysis, And then they would like to enhance the traditional Indian exports, gems and jewelry, in automotive spare parts, and railway equipment, the refined petroleum products, textiles, and now increasingly ready-to-eat Indian products. As far as investments are concerned, they look at Australia mainly in the agribusiness and farms areas now, in addition to mining and resources, as well as EPC projects which can happen in renewables and solar farms, and that's just to name a few. I think there are opportunities in tourism as well, but due to the COVID pandemic, that has been put on the back. Thank you.
Wow, there's an awful lot there, isn't there, Anil? Thank you. Rama, no one knows the mind of the Indian consumer better than you. You've stressed on market and consumer focus to business strategy, rising aspiration and complex diversity of India. What, in your opinion, is happening in the Indian consumer market today? You're muted, Rama.
Sorry, my apologies. My apologies. Today, the Indian consumer continues, it's both the rich and the poor consumer across the board. The desire for a better life, the desire to consume. Consumption is a solution even to less than perfect public goods like education and health. I think that's really what the Indian consumer is at. And for such a strong desire, I think we just need a lot more supply. The other big change that has happened is really the increase in the digital quotient of just all of India. It's 525 million internet users, 152 million smartphones every single year. So digital India is here. I always say that when the temples of India went online, the rest of India is bound to follow. And so the offshoot of this whole digital economy is that the big problem with the Indian business model, which is consumers who have high aspirations but low income, it can now get fixed with the aggregation and the sharing and the platform plays that digital can actually offer us. So it's actually enormously exciting. So whether it's Amazon or whether it's Netflix, whether it's Indian competition from elsewhere, consumers are lapping it up where they see value.
Excellent, thank you, Rama. Peter, you've always said that since the release of the IES 2035, that corporate Australia still doesn't buy the India story. What needs to be, what needs to be told to them? What needs to be addressed? How do we sell this India story to corporate Australia?
Yeah, I think there's quite a time lag in Australia between the way corporates think of India and the reality on the ground in India. And I think the single most important question Australian corporates need to ask themselves is, where are the sources of growth for their business, for their company or for their sector? Now, obviously not every company in Australia needs an India strategy, but every exporting company in Australia needs at the very least to ask themselves, are there growth opportunities in the Indian market? And if so, how do I position myself to take advantage of it? Because we're moving into a period where the engines of growth are going to be running at many fewer cylinders globally than what we've been accustomed to. And so where the growth opportunities are becomes the big strategic question for corporate planners, I think. Now, the other thing that I think corporate Australia would probably appreciate, and this is what we tried to do in the strategy, is to give them something they can touch and feel in terms of, where do I start and how do I go about doing business with India? Because for far too long, I think India has been placed in the too hard basket in corporate Australia, and there's a once bitten, twice shy element to it. But there's also, I think, a genuine thinness of understanding about the way to go about doing business in the Indian market. And so addressing issues such as the business culture, finding the right partner, where do you focus on, how do you navigate regulation, all of those things that are really crucial questions for anyone dipping a toe into the Indian market. We need a much better knowledge base for corporate Australia. And, you know, I think Australian business needs to understand both the meta-narrative about the Indian economy, which is all about scale and direction and rates of growth, but then translate that into a deep dive into their own product and their own sectors. And I think if we can make some progress on that, it would be a worthy objective. And I think actually the post-COVID environment gives us more to work with, because a lot of Australian companies are really focused on this diversification agenda.
Following on from that, Anil, there is an awful lot of movement towards India globally from many different countries. How do you see, or what kind of advice would you give Australia as a country and Australian businesses who are, vying for, equal opportunities in India? What should they be doing to attract the attention of corporate India, more so than other countries and other companies that are from around the world?
So, Dipen, I think there are a number of areas in which Australia has an edge over other countries vis-a-vis India, and that's my firm belief. I think Australia can easily emerge as a reliable supplier, for instance, for 29 of those 49 minerals which have been identified by India's critical mineral strategy, also for India's e-mobility program. Now, recently, India has come up with a new mining policy, which renews the scope for diversification and expansion of the existing resource partnership, and that relates to mining and processing of critical and strategic minerals as well. I mentioned earlier about the Australian vocational education institutions. They have a great opportunity to get involved in a much larger scale, the training of 400 million Indian youth by 2022, and also enhance Australian presence in different areas which are related to this. Water companies from Australia can be very successful in sustainable solutions for water and economic development and water recycling in states across India. And then our leaders during this summit have also identified areas like immunology, of development of vaccines, the circular economy, surface coal gasification, waste to wealth processes, etc. And here, Australian companies are ideally situated. Again, Australia is an ideal partner for India and brains management, how to nationalize costs of logistics. Indian Australian pension fund will be very welcome in India's infrastructure development. And then the defense-related companies of the two countries have opportunities, which I've already identified for you. Indian shipyards are very keen to cooperate with the Australian shipbuilding industry. And so I think Australian businesses looking at diversification will find the advantages and opportunities in the Indian market.
Anil, all good. All of those industries absolutely, have opportunities in India. But the question is, how does Australia and Australian companies distinguish themselves apart from other countries and other companies from other countries? What do they need to do? How do they?
I think they need to focus on the areas of their expertise and make sure that they build on the existing partnership, which already exists in a number of these areas. There's a lot of groundwork which has been done over the past few years. We haven't reached fruition in those areas because of different reasons. But that should not deter them from moving on in those areas we've already been working. One good thing which has come out of Peter's report is the strengthening of the infrastructure of the Australian institutions in India, and that includes the consulates, that includes strengthening of other governmental bodies which are working to identify opportunities and to connect businesses together. And that one can see the difference on the ground. And this is not too old a process, so maybe about a year old. But already this has started to bear a lot of fruit, and the awareness about Australia and India is growing quite steadily. And I think if this effort continues, you'll have more and more Indian companies who will be very happy to work with Australian companies once they know the expertise which is available in Australia, and the fact that Australia can be an alternative market, because so far India has looked to US, to Australia and others for technology, and Japan and Korea. But besides that, I think the awareness about Australia was lacking, and that gap seems to be filling up pretty fast.
Following on from that, Rama, Australian businesses now are seeing opportunities in India, albeit at a slower rate than we would like them to. But what kind of practical advice would you give Australian businesses who are wanting to start out the Indian market?
In fact, to also respond a little bit and build on what Peter said, that obviously the meta-narrative, from what I understand, is already there, but it's how to get your hands on this great and glorious meta opportunity. I think partnerships, I think there are definitely Indian partnership opportunities. I think what has changed in India over the last decade and a half is just the amount of new age entrepreneurs that we're seeing. So you don't really have to choose between the 5 legacy business houses or the 10 of them. I also think that there is an abundance of Indian talent. So companies can come and hire an Indian management team that really helps them take the agenda forward. I think that talent is, in fact, we export a lot of talent, middle management talent, to multinationals around the world, as you know. I also think it could well be a series of small bets. It doesn't have to be one big bet your shirt. There are many Indias, and a small percentage of a large number is still a very large number. I think Australian companies, and the other big place is also not just in partnerships with new age entrepreneurs, but also capital. So India has a very vibrant startup culture. We had 9 unicorns last year, 20 totally. I don't know where they are after COVID. But I think that there is an entire shortage for startup capital, basically. I mean, you get big capital, but you don't really get a lot of startup capital. And I think that's another very, very good place to be. And MSMEs often have what it takes, but they don't actually have all the formality that comes with it, the systems, the processes, the windows to the world. And so I think there are lots of opportunities for partnership in a manner which complements what Australian companies can do. From the ground up to build is right. You need patient capital, you need a long-term perspective, but you need an engine. What I would tell Australian companies is that if you have an engine built which can fire on all cylinders, which is different segments, different parts of India, there are many Indias, you will get growth on autopilot. So all you need is really to build a small and scalable engine. So that's roughly the territory of what I believe the opportunity is.
Peter, opportunities without timelines is just a work in progress. What should be the right way of going forward in achieving tangibles in the Australia-India economic relations?
Yeah, well, that's the key question, Dipen. And I subtitled my report From Potential to Delivery, because at the end of the day, if you don't deliver, it doesn't matter how good the story is, it's going to be a little bit academic. I think targets are very important because I think they're focused strategy, and I did try and include some reasonably ambitious targets for the bilateral economic relationship, a trebling of our exports to India over the period out to 2035, a 10-fold increase in outward investment. And I think the India story is going to be a little bit different for Australia in Asia, in that I think trade and investment may be better twinned in this relationship than they have been in our other big Asian economic relationships. And that's partly a reflection of Indian economic policy settings, which I think will be more investor friendly and faster to open up foreign investment than they will to open up market access. So that investment objective and target's important. I think government leadership is important for any sort of large strategy on both sides. In Australian terms, I'm very pleased that the government accepted my recommendation to set up a cabinet subcommittee tasked with regularly reviewing implementation of the recommendations. So this imposes a certain discipline to the strategy in that officials and ministers are held accountable for progress towards reaching these targets. The whole idea of sector-specific strategies, I think, is an attempt to get to the tangible more directly than you would otherwise. So each of those 10 sectors come with a strategy. And of course, focusing on 10 identified states doesn't mean you don't do other things in India elsewhere, but I think that also helps you get a level of traction that you wouldn't otherwise have. And the last thing I'd say, and this applies, I think, for both of our countries, is anything we can do to enhance market access to each other's markets, I think, will bring tangible results more quickly than they otherwise would come. And so I think it's important that we do try and address bilateral barriers, whether that's through the revived CECA negotiations or in other ways. And I think it's important that we both keep pushing on the trade liberalization door. I think if India could find its way to review its position on RCEP, that would be a great step forward, and it would have flow-on benefits for our bilateral relationship. So there's some of the things that you can go from promise to tangible.
Thank you, Peter. Anil, I'm giving you the hard questions. I hope you don't mind. But as someone who has, spent considerable years in the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, where does Australia stand in terms of prioritized countries for engagement for India? We've always felt that Australia has always put India at the forefront of its thoughts, but it's never really been reciprocated as much as we'd like it to be. Where do you think, where would you say it is today, and how far have we come within, the corridors of New Delhi?
So, Dipen, we know that India-Australia relationship has had its ups and downs, but currently I would say that Australia is seen as a key strategic partner, both geopolitically as well as economically. And there is an Australia-India vision for the Indo-Pacific, which coincides with each other. There is a convergence of interest in working in tandem in the Pacific and the Indian Oceans. Both countries now have a similarity of views on multilateral institutions, the rule of law, and a free and open Indo-Pacific. So Australia also economically, I would say, is an ideal strategic partner for India as it moves forward to achieve what we call here as transformative and inclusive economic growth. What India needs to do is to achieve this growth while also dealing with some peculiar challenges of a large and growing population. And that itself throws up challenges like urban development, infrastructure, and water scarcity. So Australia provides a complementarity of resources which are available, and also the approach in dealing with these challenges, making it a right partner for India to collaborate with. There is this Make in India initiative, which was launched, as you know, in 2014. And now we have the Atmanirbhar or self-reliant mission of India, which was launched post-COVID-19 in 2020. Both of these cover sectors in which India is open to investments and collaboration. And these include areas like mining, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, IT, infrastructure, defense, space, and tourism, etc. All these areas are those in which Australia can be a very valuable partner for India.
Thank you. Rama, in your book, We Are Like That Only, you have a section on Made for India. Can you please talk to this concept on how it relates to Australian businesses and why this is so important for businesses to understand?
The idea is that if you transplant what you have and look for an extension market where you just import a strategy into India, it's not going to work. Very simply, structurally, India is different, right? I alluded earlier to the fact that our per capita income is just so much lower, even though the total economy is large, which basically means that business economics that are built for a small number of people who earn a lot of money, a market like that is never going to work in a market like India, where you have razor-thin margins and ginormous volumes that auto-compound. So I call it real like that only because it is what it's Indian English for it is what it is, just deal with it. Because even in the lifetime of probably the youngest person listening to this, we're never going to hit a 60,000 per capita GDP kind of number. So what we really tell companies, and now we're seeing a lot of multinationals that have done it, is to say, take your competencies, take your capabilities, maybe take Indian partners, and start building for India at the appropriate price performance point that India can actually deal with. You cannot supply yesterday's quality goods at lower prices because it is a networked world. And we have Indian consumer, a bit of a monster, is used to very good stuff at reasonable prices. So I think off late we've seen a lot of companies that have actually Indianized their strategies, so to speak. And by Indianize, it's not cola light or no frills. It just is getting the price performance right, using state-of-the-art tech and learning to deal with now what is going to have to be a digital or a phygital model, which can deliver the appropriate price performance and make a profit for yourself. So, just a fun fact, Amazon actually sells cow dung, 8 varieties of cow dung in India. And if you wonder what it's for, apparently it's for some kind of purification rituals. Netflix has come in with largely Indian content, and you have 4 million users in 4 years, and we think that just scratches the surface. It's 21 million babies a year, and we don't really have children's entertainment. So we're saying, hey, these are the opportunities. Don't transplant, translate. I think that's really what we're saying.
Wonderful, thank you. We're coming close to our session. I might ask each of you to provide some closing remarks for a minute or so. Peter, would you like to start?
Yeah, Dipen, look, the post-COVID world is obviously going to be a challenge for everybody. I mean, we're facing a global recession. All of our economies are going to be under a great deal of strain. Many of the projections that we were living with are going to prove to be overly optimistic. But the point I would sort of leave you with is, notwithstanding the bumpiness of the next 2 or 3 years in terms of the economy, I think the sort of structural drivers of what's happening in the Indian economy, whether that is the urbanization of the country, the movement from the informal to the formal economy, the demography of a young India, the aspiration of the Indian people, all of those things, I think, will continue to shape the Indian economic story, and therefore will continue to shape the framework within which Australia and India will need to engage. Now, along the way, I think both our systems are going to be put under a great deal of pressure. I think questions of productivity and economic reform in both our countries are going to have to move much closer to the center of our political preoccupations than perhaps they have been up to now. But I don't see the post-COVID world as requiring a fundamental revisiting of the long-term future of our relationship, even if there'll be some bumps and detours along the way.
Agree. Thank you. Anil?
I'd take off from where Peter left then, and I think the way to look at India is, in the future, and obviously this is an ongoing process. As you know, we have in India undertaken a number of reforms, and post-COVID again, there have been reforms which have come out in mining, in MSMEs, in agriculture, and banking and financial sector. But in general, the attempt has been to pull India up the rankings in the ease of doing business, and obviously much more can be done. So that means, removing the impediments to investment, such as speedy decision-making, infrastructure shortfalls. All those need to be addressed. India will certainly move towards more land and labor reforms, which need to be accelerated. And I think it will try and create more of a level playing field for foreign investors in the domestic market. Also strengthen a grievance redressal mechanism in the future. And obviously, there has to be a clear focus on the labor-intensive sectors in going forward. And again, I think research and innovation in India will move towards universities, just like in Australia, rather than being conducted through research councils at the moment. And there's a new education policy on the annual for this. So above all, I think what will happen is that the states in India will be will have to be more proactive, and they will become so in solving the issues of investors and also enhance their hand-holding practices. So I think the Australian target is right, and on this part, we are a good time together.
Thank you, Anil. And Rama?
I'd say India is resilient. The post-COVID world, this too shall pass. I think the fault lines have been shown up fairly clearly as a result of this whole pandemic and where we are. The policy measures are also fairly substantive. They've been partly done, but I think they're all moving in the right direction. What I'd say to Australian companies is this ugly duckling isn't going to become the beautiful swan, but it is going to be an increasingly valuable and very receptive ugly duckling. And there are lots of opportunities for gain and pain. There are lots of opportunities for where and the way in which you would like to play. So engage at the micro level on what the opportunities can be, and partnerships will work.
And in closing, from my perspective, don't look at India just as a market, but as a place where you design, develop, and manufacture holistically. India offers its own set of opportunities and possibilities. Democracy, demographics, and demand, powered by digitization, decentralization, are unlocking the new market opportunities. On that note, I'd like to sincerely thank our panelists, Peter, Anil, and Rama. Thank everyone in Australia and India and around the world for joining us. Please don't go anywhere. We have an exciting session on sports and the wars coming up too. Thank you very much, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon.
Thanks.
Namaste and welcome to India Global Week. I'm your host Priyanka Deo, reporting from New Delhi. I want to thank our fabulous moderator and panel for a great session. As the moderator just concluded, don't India is just a market, but its own set of unique opportunities. And as PM Modi said in his address yesterday here at India Global Week, India is going to be a leading player when we look at a global revival. With that being said, if you guys as the audience have any thoughts, any questions on our fabulous sessions today, shout outs to any of our panelists or hosts of this conference, please be sure to use the hashtag #BeTheRevival. I'm tracking it here on social media, so be sure to leave your thoughts. That being said, we're going to go right to our next panel just here in a few minutes. Stay tuned on India Global Week.